She was 5 months along when he put his ring on the kitchen counter and walked out the door without looking back. And she stood in the hallway of the apartment they had shared for 3 years with her hand on her stomach and said nothing. Not because she had nothing to say, but because the thing she was carrying was so much larger than the thing he was leaving, and she had already decided. In the cold and clarifying silence of a woman who has just been handed both a loss and a reason, that he would find out the truth the way people find out the things they should have stayed to learn. In a room he could not walk out of, in front of people he could not manage, at a moment entirely beyond his control. Welcome back, my wonderful family and friends. I am Mr. Zaha. Thanks for tuning in today. A kind words from a man who has seen it all. Marriage are not mostly bed of roses. Sometime you need more of. More of what? Can't say. Continue watching, and you will surely know what to do in situations like this. Kindly hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Tomorrow, I'll be bringing you another exciting story you definitely don't want to miss. So let's get started. Savannah, Georgia in March was the kind of beautiful that felt almost unreasonable. The squares were in bloom, the 22 of them, scattered through the historic district like green rooms in an open house, the azaleas coming in pink and white, and the particular deep red that locals called Savannah red, as though the color belonged to the city by birthright, which in a way it did. The Spanish moss moved in the salt-edged breeze off the river, and the live oaks threw their complicated shadows across the brick sidewalks, and the whole city had the quality it always had in March, of something waking up slowly, deliberately, in no particular hurry, because Savannah had always understood that the most beautiful things do not rush. Isabella Gregory had grown up in this city. She knew its every register. The tourist Savannah of the River Street restaurants and the ghost tours, and the women in sun hats photographing the squares, and the real Savannah underneath it. The Savannah of the families who had been here for generations, who had built things and lost things and rebuilt them again with the specific, undefeatable stubbornness of people whose roots went down further than any storm had yet reached. Her roots went down very far. This was the thing about Isabella Gregory that most people in her current life did not know. That the people who knew her as the quiet, composed woman who managed the front office of Whitfield Architecture on Bull Street, who brought homemade biscuits to staff meetings and remembered everyone's birthday and spoke in the measured, unhurried way of someone who had been taught that words were worth the time it took to choose them carefully. Those people did not know her full name. They knew Isabella Gregory. They did not know Isabella Gregory Harmon. As in Harmon Properties. As in the real estate and development company founded by her grandfather, Charles Harmon Sr., in Savannah in 1962, which had grown over 60 years into the most significant privately held property portfolio in coastal Georgia. Commercial buildings, residential developments, historic preservation projects, 17 properties in the historic district alone. The kind of company that shaped the physical landscape of a city so gradually and so completely that most people walked past its buildings every day without knowing who owned them, which was precisely how the Harmon family had always preferred it. Isabella's mother, Diane Harmon Gregory, had married out of the family name, but never out of the family business. Her father, James Gregory, had been a Savannah architect, a good one, quiet and precise, the kind of man who loved buildings the way some men love music, with the full and uncomplicated devotion of someone who has found their language. He had died when Isabella was 19, a cardiac event on a Tuesday morning that had rearranged the family's geography permanently and sent Isabella into the specific, focused grief of a young woman who converts loss into work, who had finished her business degree at SCAD and come home and given the next 12 years to the quiet, thorough education of learning everything her grandfather had built. Charles Harmon Sr., Papa Charles, 91 years old, still in the house on Gaston Street, still sharp in the way of a man whose mind had been too interested in too many things to slow down, had been preparing Isabella for the Harmon legacy since she was 7 years old. She had simply never made it public. She was 34 now, and the transition of operational control had been in motion for a year, handled through the Harmon Family Trust with the quiet, comprehensive care that the Harmon family brought to everything. No announcements, no profiles in the Savannah Morning News, no performance of significance. Just the gradual, documented, legally precise transfer of a legacy from one generation to the next. Anthony did not know any of this. She had not lied to him. She had simply never been asked. She was folding baby clothes when her phone rang. Not her phone. His name on her phone, which should have been the same thing, which for 3 years had been the same thing, and which now carried the particular, nauseating significance of a name on a screen belonging to a man who had put his ring on the kitchen counter 6 weeks ago and walked out and had not called once in the 6 weeks since. She looked at the screen. She set down the tiny white onesie she had been folding. She answered, "Isabella." His voice was the voice she knew. Anthony McAllister, 38, the regional sales director for a commercial insurance firm headquartered in Atlanta, a tall man with an easy smile and the particular confidence of someone who had always been good-looking enough for rooms to arrange themselves slightly in his favor. The voice that had said, "I love you and I can't do this," in the same register, which was the thing she had been thinking about for 6 weeks. "We need to talk about the apartment." "The apartment," she said. "My name is on the lease," he said. "I need to know your plan." She was quiet for a moment. She looked around the apartment, the one on Jones Street, 3rd floor, the tall windows that caught the afternoon light and threw it gold across the hardwood floors, the kitchen where he had made Sunday omelets for 3 years, the hallway where he had set down his ring and walked out without looking at her. The nursery she had been quietly assembling in the 2nd bedroom, the crib her mother had helped her build on a Saturday afternoon with a glass of sweet tea and a refusal to cry in front of her daughter. "I'll be out by the end of the month," she said. "I don't want to be difficult about this." "You're not being difficult, Anthony," she said. "You're managing logistics. It's fine." A pause. "How are you?" He stopped. "How are you feeling?" She placed her hand on her stomach. 5 months. The baby moved sometimes now, small, interior movements, the specific and astonishing communication of a person who did not yet have words but had presence, complete and undeniable presence, the most honest thing in her life. "I'm well," she said. "Isabella, I'll have my things out by the 31st, she said. "I'll leave the keys with Mrs. Aldridge downstairs." She ended the call. She picked up the white onesie. She kept folding. She moved back to the house on Gaston Street. Her mother had been in the front garden when the moving truck pulled up. Diane Gregory, 61, a Savannah woman of the particular, formidable variety that the city produced in its best generations, who had been through enough to know that the appropriate response to your daughter returning home pregnant and abandoned was not visible grief, but visible competence. She had directed the movers with the authority of a woman who had been directing things for 30 years. She had made up Isabella's old room with the good linens. She had stocked the kitchen. She had not once said, "I told you so." Papa Charles had met Isabella in the front hall when the movers were done. He was 91 and walked with a cane he resented and had the eyes of a man 50 years younger. The specific, unhurried intelligence of someone who has seen enough of the world to find most of it predictable and still find some of it surprising, which he considered a great gift. He had looked at his granddaughter in the hallway of the house he had built his family in, and he had put his free hand on the side of her face, and he had said, "You are a Harmon. You were a Harmon before him, and you are a Harmon without him, and whatever comes next. This family does not break." Isabella had held it together until she reached her old room. Then she sat on the edge of the bed with the good linens, and she allowed herself, in the specific privacy of the room where she had grown up, 20 minutes of complete and honest grief, for the man she had loved, for the life she had imagined, for the version of this pregnancy that had existed before the ring on the kitchen counter, the version where Anthony was in the apartment and present and choosing her every day. 20 minutes. Then she washed her face. Then she opened her laptop and answered 14 emails about a commercial development project in the Starland district that needed her attention. She was a Harmon. She had work to do. The letter from the attorney arrived on a Tuesday. She was at the kitchen table with her morning coffee and the Harmon Properties quarterly report when her mother brought it in from the front mail slot. Cream envelope, Atlanta return address, the name of a law firm she recognized as one that handled high-conflict family matters. She opened it with the letter opener her father had kept on his desk. She read it twice. Anthony McAllister, through his attorney, was contesting paternity. He was not. The letter was careful to clarify, denying that he might be the father. He was requesting a legal determination of paternity and, contingent on that determination, a formal custody and support arrangement to be established prior to the birth. He was also, the letter noted in its final paragraph, requesting a full financial disclosure from Isabella Gregory in preparation for any support determination. Isabella set the letter down on the kitchen table. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked out the window at the front garden, where the azaleas were coming in the particular deep red that belonged to this city, and she thought about a courtroom. The specific, fluorescent, unmanageable honesty of a courtroom. And she thought about Anthony McAllister and his attorney requesting a full financial disclosure from Isabella Gregory. She almost smiled. She picked up her phone. She called her attorney, not a family referral. Hers, a Savannah woman named Catherine Doyle who had an office on Abercorn Street and 26 years of family law experience, and who answered on the second ring with the attentive, immediately focused manner of someone who had been expecting this call. "Catherine," Isabella said, "I need you to prepare a full financial disclosure." "Of course," Catherine said. "Standard documentation." "Everything," Isabella said. "The trust, the portfolio, the Harmon Properties transition documents, the full picture." A brief pause on the line. "Isabella," Catherine said carefully, "if we disclose the full Harmon picture, he will." "I know exactly what he'll do," Isabella said. "Let him." She looked out at the azaleas. "Schedule the hearing," she said. "I'm ready." If that last line just sent a chill through you, drop a comment. Tell me you felt it. We are just getting started. The Chatham County Courthouse on Montgomery Street had the specific, unremarkable gravity of all courthouses in mid-sized American cities. Not grand enough to be intimidating, not small enough to be dismissible, just present, solid, the kind of building that had been absorbing the weight of human difficulty for long enough that the walls had developed their own particular quality of patience. Isabella had been inside it twice before. Once at 22, when Papa Charles had brought her to observe a property dispute hearing. Not because it was dramatic, he had said, but because you need to understand what a room looks like when the documentation is right and the documentation is wrong, and you need to know which one you are always going to be. Once at 28, for the filing of her father's estate, which had been handled with the quiet precision that the Harmon family brought to everything, and which had been the first time she had seen her own name in legal documents that carried real weight and understood, in the cellular way you understand things that are true, what it meant. She was 34 now, 7 months pregnant, and she walked through the front entrance of the Chatham County Courthouse on a Thursday morning in May in a dress the color of cream, her dark hair pulled back, her mother's pearl earrings in her ears, and she felt, underneath the composure, beneath the specific quality of focused calm she had been carrying since the letter arrived 6 weeks ago, the full and honest weight of what this morning was. Not fear. Something more complicated than fear. The specific, loaded feeling of a woman who is about to be seen completely, for the first time, by someone who left before he ever learned to look. Catherine Doyle was waiting in the hallway outside Courtroom 4. She was 53, compact, with close-cropped silver hair and the particular, unhurried authority of a woman who had spent 26 years in family law and had long since stopped being surprised by the specific inventiveness with which human beings managed to complicate their lives. She had Isabella's folder under her arm, the full disclosure, 47 pages of financial documentation that Catherine had assembled with the thoroughness Isabella had requested, and the additional care of a professional who understood that the document she was carrying was not merely a legal filing, but an event. She looked at Isabella when she came through the door. "You look beautiful," she said. "I look 7 months pregnant," Isabella said. "Same thing this morning," Catherine said. She held Isabella's gaze. "Are you ready?" "I've been ready for 6 weeks," Isabella said. Catherine nodded once, the nod of a woman who believes her client and is glad to believe her, and turned toward the courtroom door. Anthony was already inside. She saw him before he saw her. He was seated at the respondent's table with his attorney, a man named Gerald Fitch from the Atlanta firm, who had the expensive suit and slightly aggressive posture of a lawyer who bills by the quarter hour and wants the room to know it. Anthony was in a gray suit she recognized. She had been with him when he bought it, a Saturday in Atlanta 2 years ago, Nordstrom on Peachtree, and she had told him the gray was better than the navy, and he had deferred to her judgment without hesitation, which had felt at the time like intimacy and felt now like information about a man who trusted her opinion on suits, but not on the architecture of their life together. He looked up when she entered. She watched it happen. The recalibration, the specific visual adjustment of a man encountering a woman he had left and finding her not diminished. She was 7 months along, and she was composed, and she moved through the courtroom with the unhurried, straight-backed ease of someone entirely comfortable in formal spaces, and she watched Anthony McAllister process this and find it not quite matching whatever version of this morning he had prepared himself for. She sat at the petitioner's table. She did not look at him again. The Honorable Sandra Whitfield presided over Chatham County Family Court with the specific, efficient fairness of a woman who had heard every variation of human difficulty that a family courtroom produces and who had developed, over 19 years on the bench, the quality of attention that could read a room in 30 seconds and a document in 3 minutes, and cut through the performed version of events to find the operational truth underneath with the precision of someone who did it every day and had gotten very good at it. She called the hearing to order at 9:15. Gerald Fitch opened for Anthony's side with the brisk confidence of a man who believes he understands the terrain. Paternity establishment, he said, was the primary matter, with support determination to follow once paternity was confirmed. He spoke about his client's desire to be involved, his client's reasonable request for financial transparency given the support implications, his client's position as a man who was simply seeking clarity about his obligations. Isabella listened to the word obligations. She filed it carefully. Catherine opened for Isabella's side with the measured, almost leisurely confidence of a woman who is holding 47 pages of documentation and is in absolutely no hurry to deploy them. The paternity question, she said, was uncontested. Isabella had no objection to establishing paternity, had in fact been prepared to establish it cooperatively before her client received a legal letter requesting financial disclosure as though she were the party with something to account for. She paused there. Judge Whitfield looked up from her notes. "Ms. Doyle," she said, "I understand there's a financial disclosure prepared?" "Yes, Your Honor," Catherine said. "Full and complete, per the request." "Let's have it." Catherine opened the folder. She walked the 47 pages to the clerk. The clerk passed them to the judge. What happened next lasted approximately 4 minutes. Isabella knew this because she counted, not obsessively, not with the frantic internal counting of a woman managing anxiety, but with the deliberate, present attention of someone who has decided to experience a moment completely rather than brace against it. She sat at the petitioner's table with her hands folded on the surface in front of her, and she counted the minutes while Judge Whitfield read. 1. The judge's expression did not change in the first minute. The professional neutrality of a woman reading a document, her eyes moving down the page with the focused efficiency of someone trained to absorb information quickly. 2. Something shifted in the second minute. Not dramatically, not visibly to anyone who wasn't looking for it, but Isabella was looking for it, had always been good at reading the small, specific adjustments that people made when information was reconfiguring their understanding of a situation. The judge's posture changed slightly. A single, brief pause in the movement of her eyes down the page. 3. In the third minute, Judge Whitfield turned to page 12 of the disclosure. Isabella knew it was page 12 because she had read the document 47 times, and page 12 was where the Harmon Properties portfolio summary began, where the numbers became the kind of numbers that changed the quality of attention in a room. 4. In the fourth minute, Judge Sandra Whitfield set the document down on the bench and looked across the courtroom at Isabella Gregory with the specific, assessing quality of a woman recalibrating completely, and said, "Ms. Doyle, I want to make sure I'm reading this correctly." "You are, Your Honor," Catherine said. The judge looked at the document again. "Ms. Gregory is the primary trust beneficiary and incoming operational director of Harmon Properties, a privately held real estate and development company with a current portfolio valuation of—" "Yes, Your Honor," Catherine said. The courtroom was very quiet. Isabella did not look at Anthony. She was looking at Judge Whitfield, but she felt him, felt the quality of his stillness at the respondent's table, the specific, seismic stillness of a man whose floor has just dropped 6 inches without warning. Gerald Fitch recovered first. This was his professional function: recovery, recalibration, the rapid reassembly of a legal strategy when the terrain shifts. And he did it with the competence of a man who bills what he bills for a reason, leaning forward and saying in the measured tone of someone choosing words with sudden, intense care, "Your Honor, if the disclosure reflects assets of this, if Ms. Gregory's financial position is, this would substantially alter the support calculus." "Mr. Fitch," Judge Whitfield said, with the precise patience of a woman who has heard everything and found most of it manageable. I'm aware of what it alters. She looked at Isabella. Ms. Gregory, she said. This information, was your former partner aware of your family's financial position during the course of your relationship? Isabella looked at the judge. She answered in the clear, unhurried voice she had been practicing since she was 7 years old in Papa Charles's study on Gaston Street, learning that the most important things you say should sound like the most ordinary things you say, because that is how you know you mean them. He was not, Your Honor, she said. It never came up. The judge held her gaze for a moment. It never came up, she repeated, with the neutral, precisely weighted inflection of a judge reading a statement that is technically complete and humanly enormous. No, Your Honor. Judge Whitfield made a note. Isabella allowed herself, in the specific privacy of her own chest, one moment of complete feeling. Not triumph, not the cold satisfaction of a woman who has outmaneuvered someone, but something more complicated and more honest than either of those things. The specific, bittersweet weight of being finally, fully seen. In a fluorescent-lit courtroom in Savannah, Georgia, by a judge and a clerk and a man in a gray suit she had helped him choose, as the complete person she had always been and had never been asked to show. She felt the baby move. She placed her hand on her stomach briefly, instinctively, the way she always did when the baby moved. The specific, private communication between them, the most honest relationship in her life. Then she folded her hands back on the table, and for the first time since she had sat down, she looked at Anthony McAllister. He was looking at her. He was looking at her the way she had never seen him look at anyone, with the complete, undefended, slightly undone attention of a man encountering something so far outside his prepared understanding of a situation that all the preparation has simply vacated, leaving only the raw, unmanaged fact of his own ignorance looking back at him across a courtroom. She held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she looked back at Judge Whitfield, and the hearing continued. Has someone ever shown you exactly who they were? Not to impress you, but because you forced their hand? Drop a comment. Tell me if you've ever been in a room where the truth arrived like that. Quiet, complete, and too late to prepare for. The hearing recessed at 10:45. Judge Whitfield called the break with the efficient, unhurried authority of a woman managing a docket and understanding that some recesses are procedural and some are necessary in the deeper sense. The sense of a room that has absorbed something significant and needs 20 minutes to reorganize itself around the new information before anything useful can proceed. She disappeared through the door behind the bench. The clerk followed. Gerald Fitch turned immediately to Anthony with the rapid, low-voiced urgency of an attorney conducting emergency recalibration, and Isabella watched from the corner of her eye as Fitch's hand moved across his legal pad, underlining something, the body language of a man whose strategy has been restructured by facts he was not given and is not pleased about not having been given. Catherine touched Isabella's arm. Water, she said. And the hall. They walked out together. The hallway outside Courtroom 4 had the specific, fluorescent quietness of courthouse hallways in mid-morning. A few people moving between rooms, a young couple sitting on a bench near the window with the particular, subdued posture of people waiting for something difficult, an older man reading something on his phone with the concentrated expression of someone who has learned to use waiting time. Isabella stood near the window at the end of the hall. The window looked out over Montgomery Street and beyond it, just visible between the buildings, the edge of one of the squares. She thought it was Chippewa, the live oak canopy just showing its green above the roofline, the Spanish moss moving in the late morning breeze. She looked at it and breathed. You're doing extraordinarily well, Catherine said. I'm standing in a hallway, Isabella said. You're standing in a hallway 7 months pregnant after the most controlled financial revelation I have witnessed in 26 years of family law, Catherine said. Credit where it's due. Isabella almost smiled. What happens in the second session, she said. Fitch will regroup, Catherine said. He'll try to redirect to the paternity determination and push the support conversation to a separate hearing once he's had time to absorb the disclosure and figure out what it means for his client's position. She paused. What it means, of course, is that the support conversation is substantially different than he walked in expecting. His client is not going to be supporting you, Isabella. The question is what kind of co-parenting arrangement serves the child, full stop. That's always been the only question, Isabella said. I know, Catherine said. You've always known that. He's learning it this morning. Isabella looked out at the square. How do you think he's taking it? She said. Not strategically. Genuinely. The honest question of a woman who had loved a man and was now standing in a courthouse hallway trying to hold both the strategy and the humanity of the situation at the same time, because she had never been a woman who could fully separate them and had stopped trying. Catherine considered this with the honest, careful attention of a professional who understood that the question deserved a real answer. I think, she said, that he is sitting in that courtroom right now discovering that the story he has been telling himself about this situation, about who you are, what you need, why he left, what his departure meant and didn't mean, is a story built on a foundation he did not know was sand. She paused, and I think that is going to take some time to land completely. Isabella nodded. She looked at the square. She thought about Anthony McAllister, not the man in the gray suit at the respondent's table, not the man who had set a ring on a kitchen counter and walked out without looking back, but the man before all of that, the man she had met at a fundraiser for the Savannah College of Art and Design on a September evening 3 years ago, who had been standing near the window with a glass of wine looking at a painting with the genuine, unself-conscious attention of someone who actually saw it. She had noticed the quality of his attention before she noticed anything else about him. She had thought, that is a man who looks at things properly. That was the thing that had started it. She had been wrong about what he looked at. Or perhaps, and this was the thought she had been sitting with for 7 months, the one that lived underneath the hurt and the strategy and the careful documentation. Perhaps she had been right about what he was capable of and wrong about whether she had ever shown him what deserved that quality of attention. She had not shown him. She had kept the Harmon part of herself in the specific, private cabinet where the Harmon family kept things too important to display, and she had loved him from that position, and he had loved her from his, and they had built 3 years on what they had shown each other without ever asking what else there was to see. This was not absolution. He had left her pregnant, and she was standing in a courthouse hallway, and the baby was moving and her mother was at home on Gaston Street, with Papa Charles waiting for a phone call. And none of that was smaller because of her own contribution to the distance between them. It was just also true. Both things were true. She had learned, in 7 months of carrying a child and carrying this, that the truth was almost always more than one thing simultaneously, and the dishonest thing was pretending it wasn't. The courthouse door at the end of the hall opened. Anthony came through it. He was alone. Fitch was not with him. He had, she guessed, gone to make phone calls. The rapid and expensive phone calls of an attorney managing a situation that had expanded beyond its original brief. Anthony walked into the hallway and stopped when he saw her by the window, and for a moment neither of them moved. Catherine looked at Isabella. I'll be inside, she said quietly. She went back through the courtroom door. Isabella and Anthony stood in the courthouse hallway in the fluorescent mid-morning quiet, 20 feet apart, and the quality of the distance between them was different from anything she had felt from him since the ring on the counter. Not the managed distance of a man who has made a decision and is maintaining it, but the raw, exposed distance of a man standing in a space he does not know how to cross. He crossed it anyway. He stopped a few feet from her. He looked at her face, at the pregnancy he had walked away from, at the woman he was apparently seeing for the first time, with the full quality of attention she had first noticed in him at a SCAD fundraiser on a September evening. Isabella, he said. Anthony, why didn't you tell me? She looked at him steadily. Tell you what specifically, she said. There are several things I could have told you. He shook his head, not dismissively. The gesture of a man who knows the question is inadequate and is asking it anyway, because he does not yet have the right one. About all of it. The company. The Harmon. I didn't know anything about. I know you didn't, she said. 3 years, Isabella. 3 years, she agreed. You didn't think it was something I should know? She looked at him for a moment, held the question with the patience it deserved, because it was not a small question and it did not have a small answer, and she had been sitting with it long enough to know that the honest version of it was more complicated than either accusation or defense. I did not tell you, Anthony, she said carefully. I didn't perform the Harmon part of my life because the Harmon part of my life has never been a performance. It's not something I lead with. It's not something my family leads with. It's something we live inside quietly and seriously, and I was waiting. She paused. I was waiting to see if you were the kind of man who wanted to know all of me, who would ask the questions that got there. She held his gaze. You didn't ask. The hallway was very quiet. He looked at her, and she watched the impact of that move through him, the specific, uncomfortable impact of a fair thing. A thing that doesn't let you off the hook and doesn't put you on it either, just sets the record straight with the level precision of a woman who has had 7 months to find the honest version of everything. I should have asked, he said. Yes, she said. You should have. A silence. Why did I not ask, he said. It came out rough, genuinely rough. The question of a man asking himself something out loud, not performing introspection, but actually doing it, in a courthouse hallway, in front of the woman he had failed. I thought I knew you. I was certain I knew you. How was I that certain and that wrong simultaneously? Isabella looked at him. Because I was comfortable, she said quietly. I was easy to be with. I didn't make demands. I managed things. I made space. She paused. I made myself into exactly the kind of woman who is easy to leave, Anthony. Not on purpose, not consciously, but I did it. I made myself small enough to fit in the version of us you were comfortable with, and neither of us ever pushed on the walls to see how much larger it could have been. He was very still. And then I got pregnant, she said. And the walls had to expand, and you. I ran, he said. You ran, she said. The words sat between them in the hallway with the specific, uncomfortable accuracy of the right word in the right place. I was afraid, he said. I know. It's not an excuse. No, she said. It's not. But it's a reason, and reasons matter even when they don't excuse. She looked at him with the full, clear, undeflectable gaze of a woman who has done her grief and is now doing something harder. The thing after grief, the honest assessment of what remains. The question I need you to answer, Anthony, is not why you left. I understand why you left. The question is what kind of man you are deciding to be right now, today, in this hallway, with a child coming in 8 weeks who is going to need a father who shows up. He looked at her. She watched the question land in him, watched it move through the layers of the morning, through the financial disclosure and the courtroom and the attorney and all the architecture of the situation, and reach the place underneath all of it where the real question lived. I want to be there, he said. I want to be. Isabella, when I left He stopped. He pressed on. I told myself I wasn't ready, that the timing was wrong, that we weren't. He shook his head. I was lying to myself. I was terrified, and I converted the terror into a decision because a decision felt like control and terror doesn't. She listened. She let him speak without filling the spaces for him, because this was the thing she had stopped doing. Filling the spaces, managing the room, making things comfortable enough that the difficult things didn't have to be said. She stood in the courthouse hallway, and she let the difficult things be said. I have thought about you every day since I left, he said. Every single day. Not about the situation, not about the logistics, about you. About the way you looked when I walked out and you said nothing. And I have spent 6 months trying to make that nothing mean something that it didn't mean, because the actual meaning, his voice broke slightly, not dramatically, the small, specific fracture of a man arriving at something true. The actual meaning was that you were too much yourself to beg, and I was too much a coward to deserve anything else. The hallway was completely quiet. Outside the window, the live oaks moved in the savannah breeze. Isabella looked at Anthony McAllister in the fluorescent light of the Chatham County Courthouse, and she felt, beneath the 7 months of hurt, and the 47 pages of documentation, and the baby moving in her, and the morning that had already done more than she had asked it to do, the full, complicated, inconvenient persistence of what she had felt for this man before any of this. The thing that had started at a SCAD fundraiser when she noticed how he looked at a painting. It had not gone away. She had wanted it to. She had tried, in 7 months of very deliberate living, to want it to more successfully than she did. The hearing resumes in 10 minutes, she said. He nodded. When it's done, she said carefully, I think we need to have a longer conversation. Not about the legal arrangement. About, she paused, choosing the words with the care she always gave to important words. About what is actually possible, if anything is. And I am not telling you tonight that anything is. I am telling you that I am willing to find out. He looked at her. That's more than I deserve, he said. Yes, she said. It is. She turned toward the courtroom door. Isabella. She stopped. The baby, he said. Is it, do you know? A girl, she said. She watched his face change. It was the most unguarded thing she had seen from him in 3 years. The specific, helpless, completely unmanaged expression of a man being reached by something that bypasses every defense because it is simply too real and too large for defenses to be relevant. A girl. A girl, he said quietly. Yes, Isabella said. She held the door. She looked at him one more time, at the man in the gray suit in the courthouse hallway, at the father of her daughter, at the person she was not done deciding about. Come inside, Anthony, she said. Let's finish this. 7 months of silence, 47 pages of truth, and one word. Girl. That broke through everything. Drop a comment right now. Tell me what you felt in that hallway. Tell me if you think he deserves that door being held open. The hearing resumed at 11 o'clock. Judge Whitfield came through the door behind the bench with the same efficient, unhurried authority she had carried into the room at 9:15, settled into her chair, looked at both tables with the comprehensive, assessing gaze of a woman who reads rooms for a living and had read this one thoroughly before the recess and was reading it again now, noting the differences. There were differences. Isabella felt them, the specific, altered quality of the air in the courtroom, the way the 20-minute recess had changed the atmospheric pressure of the space, the way two people who have had a hallway conversation that move the ground carry that movement back into the room with them, whether they intend to or not. She sat at the petitioner's table with her hands folded. Anthony sat at the respondent's table. He had not looked at his attorney since they returned. Gerald Fitch had spoken to him in a low, rapid voice when they came back in. The recalibrated strategy, Isabella assumed, the new approach given the new terrain, and Anthony had listened with the expression of a man hearing something he is not certain he intends to follow. This was new. She filed it. Gerald Fitch opened the second session with the competent, measured reorientation of a lawyer who has been paid to find the best available ground and has found it. The financial disclosure, he said, was received and noted. His client had no objection to its contents. He paused here in a way that acknowledged, without stating, that his client had had no idea what the contents would be. The support determination, given Ms. Gregory's financial position, was clearly not the operative question. His client's primary concern, his sincere and genuine concern, was establishing his paternal rights and his role in his child's life going forward. Judge Whitfield listened. She made a note. She looked at Catherine. Catherine rose with the unhurried authority of a woman who has been waiting for this moment with considerable patience. The financial disclosure, she said, had been provided in full because it was requested in full, and Ms. Gregory had never had any interest in anything other than complete transparency. As for the question of paternal rights, her client had no objection to establishing paternity, had no objection to a reasonable co-parenting arrangement, and had in fact been prepared to discuss all of this without legal intervention until she received a letter from Mr. Fitch's firm that was, in Catherine's professional assessment, more concerned with financial positioning than with the welfare of an unborn child. Fitch shifted in his seat. Judge Whitfield looked at him. Mr. Fitch, she said, your initial filing requested financial disclosure as a precondition to the support discussion. Having received that disclosure, does your client wish to revise his position on the support question? Fitch opened his mouth. Anthony spoke first. It was not, technically, the correct procedural moment for the respondent to speak directly. Judge Whitfield knew this, and Fitch knew this, and Isabella knew this, and everyone in the courtroom knew this, which is why the specific quality of Anthony McAllister standing up at the respondent's table, not dramatically, not with the performing energy of a man making a scene, but with the quiet, deliberate movement of a man who has decided that the correct procedural moment is less important than the correct human moment, made the room go completely still. Your Honor, he said, I'd like to say something directly, if I may. Judge Whitfield looked at him for a moment. The long, assessing look of a judge deciding whether to allow something irregular, reading the man in front of her with the 19-year accuracy she brought to reading people in her courtroom. Briefly, Mr. McAllister, she said. Fitch sat back with the expression of an attorney who has lost control of his client and is deciding how to feel about it. Anthony looked at the judge. The support question, he said. I want to withdraw it. Not because of what's in that disclosure. I want to be clear about that. I want to withdraw it because it was the wrong question to begin with, and I was the wrong person to be asking it. He paused. His voice was level and without performance. The voice of a man saying true things in the specific register of someone who has recently learned what true things cost, and is paying the cost anyway. I filed this action because I thought it gave me some control over a situation I had already failed badly. It was wrong. The only question that matters in this courtroom is what serves my daughter, and that question doesn't require a hearing. It requires me to be present in a way I have not been. The courtroom was very quiet. Judge Whitfield looked at him. "Your daughter," she said. "Yes, Your Honor." Something moved across the judge's expression, brief, professional, contained, but there. "Mr. McAllister," she said, "are you withdrawing the paternity and support petition in its entirety?" "I'm withdrawing the support question, Your Honor," he said. "I'm not withdrawing the paternity question. I want that established, formally, legally, completely. I want my name on that birth certificate. I want to be her father in every way the law can make a man a father." He paused. "And then I want to earn the rest." He sat down. Fitch looked at the ceiling with the expression of a man recalculating his invoice. Isabella looked at her hands on the table. She felt Catherine's slight, controlled stillness beside her, the professional equivalent of a held breath, the specific quality of an experienced attorney who has just witnessed something she did not expect and is processing it with the composed efficiency of someone who has learned to process surprises quickly. She felt the baby move. Judge Whitfield managed the remainder of the hearing with the efficient, humane precision that had made her one of the most respected jurists in Chatham County Family Court. Paternity would be established through voluntary acknowledgement, both parties agreeing, no testing required, which Judge Whitfield noted for the record with the particular, weighted neutrality of a judge making a notation that means more than its procedural content. A co-parenting framework would be drafted by both attorneys within 30 days of the birth, with a review hearing scheduled for 90 days postpartum. The support question was formally withdrawn, and the record noted that both parties had agreed to revisit the question if circumstances warranted, which, given the contents of the financial disclosure, Judge Whitfield observed with the dry precision of a woman who has seen everything, seemed unlikely to become contentious. She looked at both tables. "Ms. Gregory," she said. "Mr. McAllister." She held them both in the same look. The comprehensive, clear-eyed look of a woman who has spent 19 years watching people navigate the worst and most complicated moments of their lives and has not lost her belief in the possibility of better outcomes. This court's function is legal. What happens outside it is yours. She paused. "I hope you'll be thoughtful with it." She gathered her papers. She rose. The room rose with her. She disappeared through the door behind the bench. They were the last two people in the courtroom. Catherine had stepped out to speak with Fitch about the co-parenting framework timeline. The clerk had gone. The young woman who had been observing from the gallery, a law student, Isabella had assumed, someone's intern, had gathered her things and left with the slightly stunned expression of someone who had attended what they expected to be a routine hearing and received something considerably more than that. Isabella was still at the petitioner's table. Anthony was still at the respondent's. They were 15 feet apart, and the courtroom was empty, and the fluorescent lights held them both in the same flat, honest light that courtrooms used, the light that had no flattering angles and no shadows to hide in, the light that simply showed what was there. Anthony stood. He walked to the petitioner's table. He did not sit. He stood beside the table, a respectful distance, the body language of a man who is not assuming proximity, who is understanding for perhaps the first time that proximity is something you are given rather than something you take. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "Do what?" she said. "Ask you for something I don't deserve to ask for," he said, in a way that doesn't make it worse. She looked at him. "Then don't ask," she said. "Tell me something true instead." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the table between them, at the folders and the legal pads, and the formal paraphernalia of a proceeding that had been designed to establish facts, and had ended up revealing something considerably more consequential than facts. "I have driven past the house on Jones Street 4 times in the last month," he said. "Not to. I wasn't going to knock. He stopped. "I needed to know you were still there. And then you weren't there anymore. And I found out from the building manager when I found out you'd moved. And I didn't know where." He looked at her. "I didn't know where you were, and I didn't have the right to know. And I sat in my car outside an empty building for 20 minutes before I could drive away." Isabella was very still. "Where did you go?" she said quietly. "Forsyth Park," he said. "I sat on a bench in Forsyth Park for an hour. There was a woman there with a baby in a stroller, and he stopped. He pressed on. I sat there for an hour, and I thought about every single thing I had done wrong, and I went back and found it. The specific moment, the decision. And I knew, sitting on that bench, that the decision had nothing to do with you and nothing to do with readiness, and everything to do with a man who had never in his life stayed in a place that frightened him and had never had to face what it cost. What frightened you, she said. Specifically. He looked at her. How much I needed you, he said. How completely. I didn't have a version of myself that could hold that, Isabella. I had built my whole life around being the one who needed nothing from anyone. And you were the first person in my adult life who made that version of myself feel like a loss instead of a strength, and I didn't know what to do with that, so I. You left, she said. I left, he said. She looked at him across the petitioner's table in the empty courtroom. She thought about Forsyth Park. She knew the bench he meant, or she could picture it, the park 4 blocks from where she'd grown up, the fountain at its center, the park she had walked through every season of her childhood and continued to walk through every season of her life. The park that was in her the way Savannah was in her, the way the Harmon family was in her, part of the permanent structure. She thought about a man sitting on a bench in Forsyth Park for an hour, watching a woman with a stroller, unable to drive away. She thought about the SCAD fundraiser and the painting and the quality of his attention. She thought about what she had said in the hallway. I am willing to find out. She had meant it then. She examined it now, in the empty courtroom, with the full, honest inventory of a woman who had built her life on the practice of clear-eyed accounting. She still meant it. Anthony, she said. Yes. My daughter is going to be born in 8 weeks, she said. And she is going to grow up in a family that does not perform things. That does not manage things. That tells the truth even when the truth is inconvenient or frightening or costs something. She held his gaze. If you want to be part of that, if you want to be your father in the full sense of that word, and if you want to find out what, if anything, is possible between you and me, you do not get to be frightened and silent simultaneously. You are frightened and you say so. You are struggling and you bring it home. You do not put your ring on a counter and walk out. Her voice was level and completely honest and without anger, not because the anger was gone, but because she had decided, in the long months of carrying all of this, that anger was not the language she wanted to build the next thing in. Can you do that? He looked at her. I don't know yet, he said. I think I can. I want to. But I am done telling you things I'm not certain of as though I'm certain of them. So, I don't know yet. But I am going to find out. It was, she thought, the most honest thing he had ever said to her. More honest than the I love you, which had been real, but had also been easy. More honest than the I can't do this, which had been real, but had also been cowardly. This, the I don't know yet, but I am going to find out, said in a courtroom in the flat fluorescent light with nothing left to manage or perform, was the first thing he had said to her that was entirely and uncomplicatedly true. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. That's where we start, she said. With the honest I don't know. She picked up her folder from the table. My mother is going to want to speak with you. Something moved across his face, the shadow of something that was not quite a smile, but was in the same neighborhood. Your mother. Diane Gregory, Isabella said. And Papa Charles. She looked at him steadily. Papa Charles is 91 and has built more than you will ever fully understand, and he has been waiting his entire life to see what his granddaughter does next. She paused. He is going to have questions. Anthony McAllister, standing in the empty Chatham County courtroom in the gray suit she had helped him choose, looked at the woman he had left and the life he had nearly thrown away, and he said, with the quiet, unmanaged sincerity of a man who has run out of performances, I'll answer all of them. Isabella looked at him one more moment. Then she walked to the courtroom door and pushed it open, and the Savannah light came through from the windows at the end of the hall, warm and gold, the specific May light of a city that knew how to be beautiful without trying, and she held the door. Then come on, she said. The most powerful thing a person can say is I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. Drop a comment right now. Tell me if Anthony deserves that open door. Tell me what you would have done in Isabella's place. We are one act away from finding out what they build next. Savannah in June was the city at its most itself. Not the careful, curated beauty of the spring, the azaleas and the mild air and the city performing its best version for the tourists and the wedding parties and the people who came in March and April specifically to see it bloom. June was something else. June was Savannah with its hair down, unguarded, the heat arriving with the full subtropical authority of a coastal Georgia summer. The air thick and salt-edged and fragrant with the specific combination of river and jasmine and the particular green smell of things growing faster than they can be tended. The squares in June were deep and shadowed under the live oaks, and the Spanish moss moved slow and heavy in whatever breeze came off the water, and the city had the quality it always had in summer, of being entirely, unapologetically what it was, take it or leave it, though it very much preferred you take it. Isabella had always loved Savannah in June. She was thinking this on a Tuesday morning, standing in the nursery of the house on Gaston Street, the room that had been her childhood bedroom and had been converted, over the past 2 months, into something else entirely, something new, painted in the warm ivory she had chosen from 12 samples on a Saturday afternoon with her mother. The crib assembled against the wall with the mobile of hand-painted wooden birds that Diane Gregory had found at a shop on Broughton Street and declared non-negotiable. She was standing at the window with both hands on her stomach. 8 days past her due date. The baby, it turned out, was a Harmon. She had decided on her own timeline and was declining to be rushed, which Papa Charles had found enormously satisfying and had said so at dinner 3 nights ago with the dry, delighted authority of a 91-year-old man recognizing his own qualities in someone he hadn't yet met. Isabella looked out at the garden. Anthony was there. This was the thing she was still adjusting to, the fact of him in the spaces of her daily life. Not dramatically, not with the overcompensating energy of a man performing transformation, but with the quiet, earnest consistency of someone doing the work he had said he would do in the specific, undramatic way that work actually happens. He had come to the house on Gaston Street the Saturday after the hearing. He had sat in the front parlor with Diane Gregory, who had offered him sweet tea with the gracious, precise hospitality of a Savannah woman who has been raised to offer sweet tea to anyone who comes to her door and to reserve her actual assessment of a person for a later and more private moment. She had asked him questions, not the aggressive questions of a mother protecting her wounded child, but the genuine, assessing questions of a woman who needs to understand who she is dealing with, the questions that get to the actual character of a person if the person is willing to answer them honestly. He had answered them honestly. This had taken 2 hours and a second glass of sweet tea, and at the end of it Diane Gregory had looked at Anthony McAllister with the comprehensive, unhurried assessment of a woman who has been reading people for 61 years and said, "You hurt my daughter badly." "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I did." "You are going to have to show her something different," she said. "Not tell her. Show her. Every day?" Without being asked. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I understand." Diane had looked at him for one more long moment. Then she had stood and said, "Papa Charles will see you now." The meeting with Papa Charles had lasted 45 minutes. Isabella had not been in the room, had not been invited, which she understood was entirely correct, because what Papa Charles needed to say to Anthony McAllister was not for her to witness or manage. She had sat in the kitchen with her mother and drunk decaf coffee and listened to the silence from the study down the hall, which was the specific, weighted silence of a room where something serious was being said and received. When Anthony came out, he had the expression of a man who has been seen completely by someone with 91 years of accumulated discernment and has not been destroyed by it, but has been changed by it, which is the correct outcome. He had not told her exactly what Papa Charles said. She had not asked. She had, later, asked Papa Charles. He had looked at her from his chair in the study with the eyes that were 50 years younger than the rest of him and said, "I told him the truth about you. Everything you are. Everything you are about to become." He paused. "I told him that a man who walks away from Vivian Harmon, from Renee Carter, from Isabella Gregory." He stopped himself, the slight confusion of extreme age moving through him briefly, and she had taken his hand and held it. He had looked at her and found himself again. "I told him that a man who walks away from my granddaughter has walked away from the most extraordinary thing he will ever be offered. And that if he has found the sense to understand that, I said if, then his job for the rest of his life is to be worthy of the second chance and to never confuse being given it with having earned it." Isabella had held his hand. "What did he say?" she said. Papa Charles had looked out the study window at the garden. "He said he knew," he said, and I believed him. Anthony had been coming to the house on Gaston Street every day since. Not staying. He had his apartment in Savannah now, having transferred from the Atlanta office with the deliberate, permanent quality of a man making a geographic commitment that means something, but coming. In the mornings sometimes, with coffee from the place on Whitaker Street that Isabella liked. In the evenings, when he would sit on the back porch with Papa Charles and play chess and talk about. She didn't know exactly. She could hear the register of it from the kitchen, low and unhurried. The specific sound of two men finding out they have more in common than the woman between them. He had been at every prenatal appointment for the past 6 weeks. He had sat in the waiting room of Dr. Patricia Mintz's office on Abercorn Street with the focused, attentive patience of a man who understands that waiting rooms are also a place where you show who you are. And he had come in for the appointments when Isabella asked him to. And he had stood next to her when Dr. Mintz showed them the ultrasound. And he had looked at the screen with the specific, helpless, completely unmanaged expression she had first seen in the courthouse hallway when she told him it was a girl. That expression had not gone away. It appeared, she had noticed, every time something real reached him. The first time he felt the baby move, his hand on her stomach in the kitchen one evening. The sudden stillness of a man receiving something so significant that his whole body recognized it before his mind did. The afternoon he had come to find her painting the bookshelf in the nursery and had taken the brush without being asked and finished it. And they had stood in the ivory room together in the late afternoon light and said nothing for a long time because nothing needed to be said. They had not talked about what they were to each other. This was deliberate. On her part, she thought also on his. The mutual, unspoken understanding that some things needed to be allowed to become what they are rather than being named before they were ready. She was not his girlfriend. She was not his wife. She was the mother of his daughter, and she was the woman he was building trust with one day at a time, one honest conversation at a time, one morning coffee and one chess game with Papa Charles, and one prenatal appointment at a time. It was enough. It was, she was discovering, more than enough. It was the right size for where they actually were. Her water broke at 7:14 on a Tuesday evening. She was in the kitchen with her mother, who had the specific, extraordinary quality of not panicking that Isabella had always considered her mother's greatest gift. Diane Gregory had simply set down the dish she was drying, looked at her daughter, and said, "Well, she's ready." Anthony answered on the first ring. He arrived at the house on Gaston Street in 11 minutes, which meant he had been in the neighborhood, which she suspected was not entirely a coincidence, which she had the thought that she would ask him about later. He came through the front door and found her in the hallway with her bag already packed. She had packed it 3 weeks ago with the thorough preparedness of a woman who plans the way other people breathe. And he stopped in the doorway and looked at her, and for a moment, he was absolutely still. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said. "Are you ready?" She looked at him, at Anthony McAllister in her family's doorway, in the June evening light, in the house on Gaston Street that had held the Harmon family for 3 generations and was about to hold one more, and she felt the full, complicated, layered reality of the moment settle around her like the savannah air, warm and salt-edged and carrying the smell of jasmine. "I've been ready," she said. "Let's go." Eleanor Diana McAllister was born at 2:47 in the morning on a Wednesday in June. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. A full head of dark hair. Her great-great-grandfather's eyes. This was what Papa Charles said when he came to the hospital the next morning, walking through the door of the recovery room with his cane and the eyes that were 50 years younger than the rest of him. And he looked at the baby in Isabella's arms and said it immediately, without hesitation, with the absolute authority of a 91-year-old man who has been waiting his whole life for this face to appear. "She has Charles Sr.'s eyes. Lord have mercy. She has his eyes." He sat in the chair beside the bed. He held Eleanor Diana for 23 minutes. He did not speak for most of it. He did not need to. Anthony had not left the hospital. He had been there for the full 11 hours, not in the room for all of it, stepping out when the medical staff needed space, sitting in the hallway with the focused, present patience of a man who has decided that his job right now is simply to be near, to be available, to be the kind of person who stays. And when Eleanor Diana arrived at 2:47 in the morning and the nurse placed her in Isabella's arms, and Isabella looked up, Anthony was standing beside the bed with an expression that she did not have a word for. Not happiness exactly. Happiness was too small, too ordinary, too much a word from a regular scale for something this size. It was the expression of a man having the most significant experience of his life and knowing it completely, present to it without defense or management, simply standing inside it, and being altered by it the way significant things alter you when you let them. He held his daughter for the first time at 3:15 in the morning. He sat in the chair beside Isabella's bed, and he held Eleanor Diana McAllister against his chest, and he was very still for a long time. Then he looked at Isabella. "Eleanor," he said quietly. "Who is she named for?" "Eleanor is my grandmother," Isabella said. "Charles Sr.'s wife. She died before I was born, but Papa Charles, every story he tells, she's in it. She's in everything he built." She looked at her daughter in his arms. "And Diana is my mother's middle name." "Eleanor Diana," he said. "Yes." He looked at the baby. He stopped. He started again. "She's extraordinary. She's a Harmon," Isabella said. And the warmth in her voice when she said it was the full warmth, the specific pride of a woman speaking the name of her family in its complete sense, holding nothing back. Anthony looked up at her. "She's a McAllister too," he said. Not claiming, asking, the voice of a man who is not asserting a right, but making an offering. Isabella looked at him, at the man holding her daughter in the blue hospital light at 3 in the morning, at the father who had almost not been there and was here, at the person she was still deciding about, and had decided to keep deciding about rather than closing the question before it was answered. "Yes," she said. "She is." He held her gaze. "Isabella," he said. "Anthony, I'm not going to make a speech," he said. "I'm not going to tell you things I need to prove first." He looked down at Eleanor and back up. "But I need you to know that I understand. I understand the size of what I almost lost. Not the Harmon Trust. Not the portfolio. Not any of that." He held her eyes. "You. And her. And the life I would have been standing outside of, with my face against the glass, forever." His voice was steady and completely honest. "I understand the size of it. And I am going to spend however long you give me making sure you see that I understand it, not hear it. See it." The hospital room was quiet. Down the hall, the ordinary sounds of a maternity ward at 3 in the morning, the soft movements of nurses, a door opening and closing, somewhere a newborn's brief, indignant announcement of arrival. Isabella looked at the man holding her daughter. She thought about a courtroom and 47 pages and a hallway and an honest "I don't know yet" that had been worth more than any certainty he had ever offered her. She thought about chess games with Papa Charles on the back porch and coffee from the place on Whitaker Street, and a hand on a paintbrush finishing a nursery bookshelf in the afternoon light without being asked. She thought about what her mother had said to him in the front parlor. Not tell her. Show her. Every day. Without being asked. He had been showing her. She had been watching. "I know you do," she said. She reached out her hand. He took it. His free hand. The other still holding Eleanor Diana against his chest. And he held it the way you hold something you understand the value of, carefully and completely, with the full attention of a man who has learned, at cost, that the things worth holding require both hands. They sat together in the June hospital room with their daughter between them and the Savannah night outside the window, and the Harmon family and the long, serious, beautiful work of everything that came next ahead of them. It was not a finished thing. She was clear-eyed enough to know that. A finished thing was not what she wanted, had never been what the best things were. The floors her father refinished and the gardens her mother tended, and the company Papa Charles had built over 60 years, none of it finished, all of it ongoing, all of it requiring the daily, attentive, loving investment of people who understood that the value of a thing was not in its completion but in its continuance. She was willing to continue. She had decided that in a courthouse hallway, and she had watched him earn it one day at a time, and she was willing. Outside the hospital window, Savannah was doing what it did in the deep of a June night, quietly, unhurriedly, without performance, the river running dark and steady toward the sea, the squares sleeping under their live oaks, the Spanish moss hanging still in the breathless heat, the city that had held her family for generations holding them still, holding this too, this new and fragile and extraordinarily promising thing. Eleanor Diana McAllister opened her eyes. They were, unmistakably, Charles Sr.'s eyes. Isabella laughed, the real laugh, the unguarded one, the first completely unguarded thing she had offered in a very long time, and it filled the hospital room with the specific, irreplaceable warmth of a woman who has carried a great deal and set some of it down. Anthony looked at her laughing. He smiled. The real one, the one she had first seen at a SCAD fundraiser looking at a painting, the one that had started all of this. "What?" he said. "She looks like Papa Charles," Isabella said. He looked at Eleanor. He laughed too. And in the June hospital room, in the city that had held them both, in the blue and ordinary light of 3 in the morning, they laughed together over their daughter's head, not because everything was resolved, not because the work was done or the trust was rebuilt or the distance of the past 7 months had been erased, but because this was the beginning of what came after all of that. And the beginning was here, and it was real, and it was enough. It was, Isabella Harmon Gregory understood, exactly enough. 3 months later, on a Saturday morning in September, Isabella walked into the offices of Harmon Properties on Bay Street for her first official day as operational director, and Anthony McAllister was in the lobby, holding Eleanor Diana in one arm and 2 cups of coffee from the place on Whitaker Street in the other, and he had been there for 20 minutes before she arrived, because he had decided that showing up early was the first and most honest way he knew to show her he understood. Papa Charles heard about it that evening. He nodded once. He said, "Good." That was all. It was everything. There are people who leave and people who come back, but the ones who matter are the ones who come back different. Drop a comment right now. Tell me what this story gave you. Tell me what you're holding on to. Tell me what you refuse to let go of and who you're willing to rebuild with. This story was for everyone who ever had to decide whether the door was worth holding open. Thank you so much for watching my story all the way to the end. Your support means everything. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.